Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, joined today by my good friend, Alfredo Brown. You don't need much of an introduction to Alfredo. He's been here before, but just in case, it's Alfredo A. Brown on Twitter. That's somewhat new. Adam Azer now follows him, so you should too. Alfredo, thank you for being here again. And just remind everybody like where they can find your work and what you've been working on.
Yeah, you can find all my work over at Footballguys, your old stomping grounds from years and years ago. But we've got the Footballguys Fantasy Football Show that's on YouTube right now. We launched a couple of new channels where we have Footballguys Fantasy. We've got the Audible that's been around for 18 plus years, and the Footballguys Dynasty channel with Jagger May and Jeff Bell, guys that I know that you know very well. So we've got a lot of cool content coming out. And we'll be doing the normal weekly stuff, waivers, start sits, everything in our Sunday morning live show. We're going to be answering your start sit questions.
Outstanding. I wasn't ignoring you. I'm just sending the tweet out, telling people we're live so everybody can come hear all the fantastic things that you have to say. We are talking dynasty waiver ads today, and I'm not going to have you people in the chat saying he's already rostered in my league, because we're talking deep dynasty waiver ads. Somebody's going to say that still. It's okay. Most of you, in fact, I think 80% of the players that I sent are rostered in less than 5% of leagues. So while there will be some of these guys that are rostered in your league, there's also going to be some ads to be made, because we got news that Jonathan Brooks is starting the season on the PUP. Not really a surprise. We already knew Nick Chubb was starting the season on the PUP. TJ Hawkinson starting the season on the PUP. We're going to free up some roster spaces today, move those guys into IR spots officially, the guys that you couldn't, and then we're going to go make some ads. Maybe one of them will win you a league. Maybe one of them will win you a week. We'd probably settle for that. We'll also talk about some guys that I just want to get Alfredo's opinion on. I'm going to be watching these guys very closely the first month of the season. They are some players that I could see my opinion of their dynasty value changing drastically depending on how that first month goes. So we will just kind of break that down. But first, we start with 3 questions for our guest. Just a little peek behind the curtain. I only sent one of these to Alfredo. He doesn't know what's coming. That's fantastic. Have you changed your opinion about any rookies since the NFL draft?
Yes. The most notably would be Brian Thomas Jr., the wide receiver at LSU, now in Jacksonville Jaguars. I liked him, and I liked all the potential for him, but he struck me as a guy that I thought was going to need a little bit more time in the NFL developing his route tree. He seemed sort of like the one-trick pony, and I kind of made the joke of like, okay, they drafted flashy Gabe Davis when they already had Gabe Davis at home, but Brian Thomas has looked so much better than I imagined. And I think a lot of what I was seeing was the LSU limitations, and just what was asked of him is, hey, just go stretch the field. Like, we're just going to toss it to you deep, man. Like, we're not even going to ask you to do a whole bunch. And now we're seeing he can win on intermediate routes. He can win in the middle of the field. You know, he can win against NFL cornerbacks and getting pressed off the line of scrimmage. And so that's been really good to see. So I think the potential is still there for him to be a Calvin Ridley-esque guy in his rookie season with the Jaguars.
So I've kind of had the trio of Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey, very, very close to each other in my dynasty rankings. Did I put those 3 in the right order? Is it Worthy, then Thomas, then McConkey?
I think I'm going to go Thomas, Worthy, McConkey, but it is so interchangeable between Thomas and Worthy for me. I could see, if you like both, the tiebreaker is going to be Patrick Mahomes. So it's really a toss-up. It's like a 51-49 split between those guys for me.
That is a really good tiebreaker as well. So question number 2, you're the Dolphins guy, so we're going to ask you a Dolphins question, kind of a 2-parter. Jalen Wright, Malik Washington, 2 guys, young and exciting. And I think you could make the argument that they're like double handcuffs, because if something happens to Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, that could be great for Washington. If something happens to Raheem Mostert or Devon Achane, that could be awesome for Jalen Wright. My question is, they're not the only guys on that depth chart. There are veterans, Jeff Wilson, Braxton Berrios, and others that kind of factor in. How confident are you, if something happens to one of the 2 starters, that it's the rookies that get the chance first?
If we're doing a confidence level, I'd say I'm like right in at least for Malik Washington, I'm probably around like a 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
If it's Jalen Wright, I'm probably closer to a 7 or 8, maybe even higher. I just don't think the teams go out and draft players relatively, early or middle rounds of drafts to just not play them and let the veterans, the old veterans that have been there, start over them. And when we're talking older veterans, like we really mean it. Jeff Wilson, Odell Beckham Jr. Like if any of these guys, and Odell Beckham Jr., we're not even sure if he wants to play football right now. Like there's a bunch of weird stuff going on with him and the Miami Dolphins team. Malik Washington has been able to show his kick return ability, his punt return ability. I think they're going to use him a lot on screens. So confidence level that they choose him to be like the immediate starter, not super high, but I do think that if he just gets a chance on the field, I think he can and likely will do more than Braxton Berrios would do. So I really like both of them with the massive contingent upside. I think if I had to pick one out of these, it's going to be Jalen Wright, who I think could have a Raheem Mostert or Devon Achane-esque season given the opportunity.
Well, that fits because the running back position is so much more about opportunity and situation. And that opportunity and situation, they've really, I was reading, of course, we always read what Jacob Gibbs tweets, but I was reading some of Gibbs' tweets from this morning, and he was talking about, I think it was 24% of the snaps that Wright played, he was not in the backfield. So they really are moving him around quite a bit. Usually when teams tell you they're going to do that, they don't actually do it. But they did it a lot with Achane last year as well. So maybe he's more of the Achane replacement. A couple of guys on the same team that I have kind of moving up, both from a redraft and a dynasty perspective, Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin. We had the summer of Javonte Williams is going to get cut. LOL, that didn't happen. Sounds like Samaje Perine is getting either traded away or he's getting cut. Audric Estime will have somewhat of a little role because Sean Payton always uses 3 running backs, but it seems pretty clear it's Javonte and Jaleel at the top. How are you viewing these 2 Broncos running backs heading into the season?
I think that we are going to see a lot of Javonte, and I think more than people have expected. I think that not everybody realizes how much he was getting fed last year, despite having Samaje Perine and Jaleel McLaughlin involved, and that was Javonte coming off an injury. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but just knowing the type of volume he was getting last year coming off of the ACL, PCL, MCL, all the different CLs, but then now having him be 11 pounds lighter, looking really fresh, looking really explosive. You got a running back that's on a contract year. Those oftentimes tend to be good bets. I think that we're going to see a lot of work for Javonte, and I don't know that it's necessarily going to be a thunder and lightning thing where Jaleel McLaughlin comes in for passing downs and Javonte comes off. Javonte Williams has been a great pass catcher in his time in the NFL. And it's a very Broncos thing to pass the ball to the running backs under Sean Payton. It's a very Bo Nix thing to pass the ball to running backs when he is under center. So I'm expecting a big year for Javonte. I've got him ranked as my running back 22 in redraft. And he's a guy that I think could have a big year for dynasty managers. I don't know what that's going to mean for his future, though, especially him being on a contract year.
Yeah, and I think like he is still at least young enough to where it's possible that something could happen after this year, but it's no guarantee. You should treat him as kind of one of those 1-year backs. But I'm pretty excited about him. Listen, I think if you're a top 20 running back in redraft this year and you're not 30 years old, then you got a pretty good chance of being a top 20 dynasty running back. So Andrew says, I feel like I gave up 1 year too early on Javonte Williams. I think a lot of people are going to share that same sentiment over the next few months. Let's take our first break, and then we'll get into some of our deep dynasty waiver ads.
America's Service Academies kick off their seasons right here on CBS Sports Network.
So we are digging deep. We're going to start with the Kansas City Chief, and people are going to mock me for that. But I want to start with Carson Steele at the running back position. I'll be honest, I have not been as excited as everyone else seems to be about Carson Steele. His roster rate is already up to 7%. So he's rostered in 7% of CBS leagues. I have a couple of dynasty leagues, and this is kind of the impetus for this show also. I have several dynasty leagues where we don't make waiver ads from the draft until right about now. And then there's a little feeding frenzy, and Carson Steele is going to be a big part of that feeding frenzy. I heard Kyle Long yesterday on CBS Sports HQ refer to him as Cream Hunt, which is a pretty fantastic nickname. Dude runs like Isaiah Pacheco just through everything. How interested are you in adding Carson Steele? And do you think he's anything more than a fun preseason story?
I have tried to promise myself that I will have more fun in Dynasty and try
Yes.
to believe these stories because I treat Dynasty so businesslike and so transactional. And I went on the Football Guys Dynasty show last night, and I was kind of the wet blanket on every single player, including Carson Steele. So I'm trying to allow myself to have a little bit more fun with him, but it's really hard to convince ourselves that this is going to be a thing after 11 carries in the preseason. I get it. There was a nice, long touchdown run, and there's some openings in the depth chart for the Chiefs backfield. But this is also a guy that he's been classified as a running back, fullback, tight end. I think in a good case scenario, we're talking about a guy who's like a Kyle Juszczyk, and that could be really fun for the Chiefs themselves. I think it could be really fun for real football. I don't know that he's ever going to be a guy that we say, okay, well, he is the absolute handcuff to Isaiah Pacheco. He goes down and, Steele is out here getting 20 touches a game. I don't know that ever happens. So sure, he's worth the stash. I'm not going crazy and trying to buy him. I actually said yesterday on the Football Guys Dynasty show that if I have him and there's a Chiefs fan that really wants him for like a 3rd round rookie pick, I'll just sell that right now and take what I can.
I think I agree with that. Fun story. I had several of my home leagues this past weekend, and those are the leagues from the people from Kansas City. So things get a little wild. Carson Steele went in round 4 of a redraft draft. I don't know why. I didn't laugh at the person. We just moved on. It was fantastic. There are 3 more running backs that I had on my waivers list, and we'll see if you have any that you think I missed. Trey Sermon, 5% rostered. I'm pretty sure as long as he can get healthy, he's the clear backup to Jonathan Taylor. Dalvin Cook is 11% rostered, probably because there's some redraft leagues that people haven't cleared out last year's rosters yet, and the person that drafted Dalvin Cook just quit halfway through and never dropped him. But he's available on your Dynasty waiver wire, and he's also available visiting the Dallas Cowboys, who don't have a starting running back, I don't think. And then, I apologize for butchering this, the rookie Sione Vaki, Detroit Lions, maybe another double handcuff. Because if something happens to Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery, of course, Craig Reynolds is still there. So I'm not as certain about that one either. Are you interested in adding any of these 3 backs? And which one is the most interesting?
I have no interest or negative interest in Dalvin Cook. I think he's, for lack of a better term, cooked. So I don't think that's there. Trey Sermon is the guy that he might be the clear-cut handcuff there, but there's also, there's an Evan Hull thing that's going on there in Indy where he can get on the field for passing downs, and that's something that when Sermon got an opportunity to play back in week 15, he didn't get any receiving work whatsoever. So even as a handcuff, he's going to be limited, and I think that we would need to see something where there's no Anthony Richardson, no Jonathan Taylor, and no Evan Hull. And that's what happened last year. And it was still like 9 PPR points for Trey Sermon. So it's something. I'm not going to say it's nothing. Sione Vaki is another guy. Great story. There's a lot has to happen for him to be on the field. It's a guy that's like not a natural running back either. He's still learning the position as well. So I guess if I have to take one of these guys, it's going to be Trey Sermon because I think he'll have the most immediate value. I just don't know how high that ceiling really is.
Now, you sent me a couple of names.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Jordan Mason, who I do think is available in some leagues. And it's a good point. We don't want to get so deep that we leave out guys that are on your waiver wire. If Jordan Mason's out there, I think you would agree. Add him over all the guys we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure that he's the number 2 running back over Elijah Mitchell, we think, but there's really no guarantee that Elijah Mitchell is going to be healthy whenever Christian McCaffrey goes down. So roster Jordan Mason for sure. You did send me Velus Jones, who is not a running back, but might be. So what's your take on him?
He might be. This is something that my co-host Dave Kluge has been talking about, that Velus Jones is not going to go away. And I just recently started watching the Hard Knocks Chicago Bears, and seeing Velus Jones working with the running back, getting some touches. I don't know that it's going to turn into anything magical, right? Like there's some Cordero Patterson vibes here. We might get that. The Bears backfield is going to be really tough to try to predict, but I think that this is a guy that they want to try to make it work and spend some high draft capital on him. He is a good athlete. I do think that he's one of those players that does have tremendous upside at the running back spot. So, like if I'm sitting there between maybe a Trey Sermon and a Velus Jones, I think a Trey Sermon gives me a better floor.
Right.
is able to take over. But I think Aviles Jones is one of those guys that can just absolutely break a long one. And I don't want to say win you your week, but he can have those spike weeks where it actually makes a difference for your fantasy team, especially in leagues.
Let's talk about quarterbacks. And one quarterback leagues, like it's kind of hard to know who's on your waiver wire and why you're picking them up anyway. But for super flex leagues, I think this is an interesting time of year because I find myself having to, with roster cut downs, maybe having to cut some backup quarterbacks that I've been holding, or maybe I've got a couple roster spots and I'm weak at quarterback. I might want to add some backup quarterbacks. So who are your favorite backup quarterbacks to target in a super flex league?
Yeah, I think if we're going a little bit deeper on these, I'm sure there's someone out there that cut Sam Howell after the Commanders were drafting Jaden Daniels and he got traded and all that. And I think that if Geno Smith does miss any time with an injury, Sam Howell is tailor made for that offense, that Ryan Grubb offense that wants to take some vertical shots, got tons of wide receivers. I think that's a guy who I'd be putting a waiver claim on. Skylar Thompson, Dolphins backup quarterback now after Mike White got cut. I think it becomes really interesting just because that Dolphins offense is so good, and they obviously believe in him enough to make him the clear-cut backup to Tua. And then the recent player who got just traded now, Malik Willis, who's actually looked pretty good in preseason. I don't know if that's just you spend enough time in an offense, you get better in it, but it's kind of similar to the Skylar Thompson thing in Miami. The Packers offense is good. There are a lot of good weapons there. If Jordan Love misses time, I love the rushing upside from Malik Willis. I love the offensive environment that he's in. And I think that teams often only go and trade for a quarterback when they say he's got some familiarity with the verbiage that we have in our system. He can be an easy transition. And so that's what we saw with the Sam Howell, Malik Willis, these guys they were traded for because they're going to be good fits for those systems.
And I'll say another guy, like I just looked at it. Jameis Winston is rostered in 4% of leagues. Deshaun Watson can maybe practice for a week before he gets a sore arm again. I don't understand exactly what's going on with that situation, but the vibes are terrible. So if Jameis ended up starting 4, 6, 8 games this year, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I was wondering how highly or lowly rostered Jameis was in dynasty leagues, but yeah, I mean he's a guy we've seen him do it before in fantasy, and the Browns offense they're set up also to be more of a vertical passing attack this year. They've got more wide receivers on the team than ever, and they're running more 3 wide receiver sets than ever. So yeah, that seems to fit Jameis Winston to a T.
Good friend Matt Weber says you could probably get Josh Allen on most waivers. It's a shot at me for having Josh Allen ranked as QB4. I just always appreciate when Matt is here and in the chat. Thank you for being here, Matt. And I'm sorry that I ranked Josh Allen too low. Let's talk about wide receivers. There is a guy in Denver. We just saw Tim Patrick is on his way out, hopefully on his way to the Pittsburgh Steelers, because I think he could do some good things there and be their second best wide receiver. But he's gone. And I think we're all hoping that Sean Payton will give one of the smaller wide receivers that he drafted a chance. I don't know. Like he just hates these guys so much that he drafts them and refuses to play them. But there's another guy and Benjamin Ulrich's been talking about this all off season. Another name that I'll probably butcher, but Devon Vele has apparently a big part of the reason they're not keeping Tim Patrick, because he has been much better and much more involved than Troy Franklin in practices and camp so far. He's only 1% rostered. So that, especially if I have the ability, and I know some leagues you have to set those, you've already had to set the practice squad designations, but if you can pick him up and just stash him, I would love to do that.
Yeah, I don't know that here I am. I'm going to be the wet blanket. I don't know how excited I am.
You are the wet blanket.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Like he's a 26-year-old receiver on quite possibly one of the worst offenses in the league, where it's going to be very check down heavy. I think he's a bit more of just Josh Reynolds insurance than a guy that's actually going to see the field. Maybe he does. Maybe I'm totally wrong. It seems like the reports coming out of Denver, our own Cecil Lammy at Footballguys has been saying Devon Vele is a guy to watch as well. So I could be 100% wrong here. Everything in me says, like, God, just please give Marvin Mims a shot out there on the field.
Right.
He's good when he plays. It's just hard for me to say, okay, I'm going to take a 26-year-old, put him on my taxi squad and hope something happens, because we've been here before with the Isaiah Hodginses of the world, and we hold out hope and it doesn't happen. And I don't know. I'm sorry for being the wet blanket.
That's
here.
okay. So does this
Yeah.
mean, because Josh Reynolds is 16% rostered? I once drafted Josh Reynolds over Cooper Kupp in a rookie draft. That was a good time. Does this mean that Josh Reynolds is going to be the clear number 2 in this pass offense?
I think so. I think so, and I think that he was one of the first free agent signings that the team made, and I think he is a guy that has proven he's not going to be an incredible playmaker or an explosive guy or someone you build your offense around, but he's shown he can be somewhat reliable. I think that he can be. His hands aren't always the best, and if he does get a few drops, I mean, we might see some Devon Bailey out there. But I think that the intention right now is for Josh Reynolds to be the starter there in Denver, and I just don't know what that means. I really don't, because wide receiver 1, Cortland Sutton, that type of production in Denver might be the same as a wide receiver 3 on a lot of other teams. So wide receiver 2 in Denver could equal wide receiver 5 on a lot of other starting offenses this year. I really don't know, especially with Bo Nix. I'm just not sure how good or bad this Denver offense could be.
It sounds like you're pretty sure it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree with you, except I think that the Bo Nix Sean Payton marriage, as much as I dislike what Sean Payton did with Russell Wilson last year, and as much as I don't think Bo Nix would have been very good in probably 90% of the other NFL offenses, those two might have just been made for each other.
Yeah.
And so I think they might be better than they should be. I had 4 other wide receivers on my waiver list that are not Denver Broncos, and a couple of them are also not on terrible teams. Andre Yoshivas is 4% rostered, and I have little doubt that he is the 3rd wide receiver on the Bengals. I think that for Jermaine Burton to make a difference this year, we need a T. Higgins or a Jamar Chase injury. I think Yoshivas will be that slot guy most of the time. We've also got De'Ami Brown, who apparently gets a big boost because they just traded Jahan Dotson away, and it doesn't sound like Luke McCaffrey's ready to play a big role at this point. We've got Van Jefferson, who unfortunately is the current number 2 wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then Jalen Naylor might be the number 2 guy in the passing game for the Minnesota Vikings because TJ Hawkinson's on PUP. Jordan Addison has both a foot injury and some legal problems. Of these 4 guys, Yoshivas, Brown, Jefferson, Naylor, do you care about any of them, or are you just going to like poo-poo them all?
I was going to say care is a strong word. If I'm going to hold on to some of my priors here and maybe hope that one of these guys has some upside. Oh man, it might be De'Ami Brown.
Yeah.
Just because I know he's a good deep threat. I know that there's going to be some target volume for him there. I still worry asking, can Jaden Daniels support 2 or 3 targets in this offense? There's going to be Austin Eckler taking targets away, and Zach Ertz, and I think Terry McLaurin's really the only viable guy in that Commanders passing attack that you want to have in your lineup or even rostered. Andre Yoshivas is interesting because I think it's really easy for us to look at that 3rd wide receiver spot in Cincy and say, like, that has been actually pretty productive for us in the past. I don't know if it's going to be the same as it's been in past years with Tyler Boyd there. Now that they have a really good pass catching running back in Chase Brown, they've added Mike Gesicki, who they kind of want to have as this big slot. And like you said, Jermaine Burton's there, and who knows like what is going on behind the scenes. I guess for me, the excitement would probably be around De'Ami Brown because I know he's the big play deep threat in a new exciting offense. If I wanted someone short term that I was like, I just need like 8 points a week, I might go Jalen Naylor, actually, because I think Sam Darnold and the Vikings offense are going to be better than most people expect, especially early on.
So we did have a question in the chat, and this might be a redraft question, but we can answer it from a dynasty perspective. 1 spot left for a running back. Yeah, Khalil Herbert, Justice Hill, Tank Bigsby, or a lesser known rookie. What would be your preference?
I am such a sucker for Khalil Herbert. I still think that he might be the most talented running back in Chicago, which might sound crazy, but he's just incredibly efficient every time he touches the ball. I know that there's going to be a role for him there. So it's not just a player that has contingent upside if someone gets hurt. I think he's actually going to be getting touches in both the running and receiving game. So yeah, Khalil Herbert for me.
And I think that's probably the right answer. I think we see a better Tank Bigsby this year, but I don't think it matters if Travis Etienne stays healthy. And I'd rather bet on that than betting on DeAndre Swift staying healthy. I think at tight end, you had sent me a couple of wide receivers also. Bo Melton. Why not throw another Packers wide receiver in the mix? There's only 7 of them.
Yeah, exactly. I want pieces of a good offense, and especially like that's why I've been in on Christian Watson all year, is because there's not really an established order of things or a real true target funnel. When Christian Watson is in the field, he's the guy that's getting the targets. But I think that much was made about Dontavian Wicks, who I think is a good player as well. My co-host Dave Kluge has been just gushing over Bo Melton, and I've been kind of making fun of him for it all offseason, but I think he is a guy that we should pay attention to because he looks like he's going to make this team. It looks like he is going to be out there maybe just as often as a Dontavian Wicks. He just didn't make the flashy touchdown play here in the preseason. But in dynasty leagues, especially in those deeper leagues, I am more than happy to roster Bo Melton. I just want pieces of good offenses.
People are picking up Vele, whether you like it or not. You also said Calvin Austin. Van Jefferson, I said, was the number 2 wide receiver on the Steelers. Roman Wilson, it sounds like, was doing some things before he got hurt. You think there's a chance that Austin is better than both Wilson and Jefferson?
I still think that Roman Wilson is the guy that I like out of those 3. Everything in his history and his tape tells me that Van Jefferson is a better receiver than Calvin Austin. But I brought up Calvin Austin just because I do think that he is worth monitoring. I do think he's worth rostering. Like we saw him actually have a small role, but a role nonetheless early last season where he had a wide receiver 3 finish, a wide receiver 4 finish. So in those leagues where you are starting 3 receivers, 2 flex, it's deep benches. This offense might get a little more tricky here with Arthur Smith. And
I'm part of your wanting to have a piece of good offense strategy?
Absolutely not. Don't do that to me. Don't do that to me. I'm not going to say good. I'm not going to say good, but an offense that's a little bit more tricky and less predictable. Calvin Austin is the kind of guy that I see Arthur Smith being like, yeah, sure. Why not give him a jet sweep at the goal line? He's only 145 pounds, but let's do it anyways.
That was about as convincing a case as anyone has ever made. We've got 3 tight ends. I had Hayden Hurst because like it is a Greg Roman offense. Maybe a tight end will matter. I had Zach Ertz, which makes me want to throw open the trash can, but he's probably, in my opinion, going to see 5+ target a week for as long as he stays healthy as the number 1. I know we're excited about Ben Sinnott, and he's going to do some fun things, but I bet Zach Ertz out targets him early in the year. And then you had Kylan Granson, who has been on my list before, was probably on my list last year. I just about given up. I guess the Jelani Woods injury makes it possible again, but the Colts tight end package, and I think it was Jacob Sanderson made the good point. Like people think because the Colts play so many tight ends that they run a lot of 2 tight end sets. They actually just play 17 tight ends in one spot.
Yeah, no, that's about right. And like for the longest time, it felt like they were all the same, just like gigantic 6'5", 270-pound tight ends that were all the same guy. Kylan Granson's like the only one that's a little bit different, and he can be used in some more creative ways and be used even in the backfield as a move tight end, get him to like an H-back type role. I think there's something interesting here where, I mean, we're seeing targets with him. We're seeing him work with the first team offense, obviously with Jelani Woods out, that sort of changes things. And I think it remains to be seen, like what's going to happen with Josh Downs and his injury. Kylan Granson is a guy that I know we've seen that AD Mitchell is going into the slot, but that's not his normal or regular position. No. Like that's not where he works best. He needs to be outside. It wouldn't surprise me if we do get a little bit of Kylan Granson in the slot. Now, is that a guy I necessarily want to start at tight end? Probably not. But if tight end is looking weak on your team and you need a second or third guy, Kylan Granson I'm willing to take a shot on him. Once again, it's good offenses, or at least perceived good offenses with Shane Steichen there. And he's been able to make things work with tight ends in the past.
Do you think that a Chargers tight end matters? And do you think that it would be Hayden Hurst if they do?
You're really making it hard for me to do the whole like dynasty is fun thing today. I don't know. I don't think the Chargers matter this season.
Like none of the Chargers. Just that's what I've struggled with the running backs. Like somebody said, how can it be a Greg Roman offense and you don't have a running back from their team ranked in the top 35? And I'm like, am I supposed to get excited about 29-year-old Gus Edwards or Jake? I love J.K. Dobbins, but he's not. I don't think he's probably the same guy anymore. Somebody earlier in the chat was asking about Kamani Vidal because we're talking about deep waiver ads. I kind of thought he was a guy who was mostly drafted in rookie drafts, but if he's out there, he had one good preseason quarter. Um, you're just all the way out on the Chargers.
I don't know that I want to invest anything in there this year. Like I'm fine taking a swing on a guy like Vidal and seeing what happens, but man, like this team could be worse than we think. Like I would not be surprised if they're vying for a number 1 or number 2 pick in the NFL draft. Their defense isn't great. And the thing for me, like the saving grace was, okay, well, Justin Herbert can run this offense. Well, he's got this plantar fascia injury that those things linger. And every medical professional that I've talked to has said, like, yeah, this might be one of those things that bothers him throughout the season. So Justin Herbert has found ways to get hurt in seasons and miss games or play through the game and play poorly. I don't know that version of Justin Herbert can work with this version of the Chargers, and that anyone on this team is going to be truly fantasy relevant as much as we really want them to.
We are going to take our second break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about guys we're watching for the first month of the regular season. We're almost to the first month of the regular season. We'll be right back.
Yep, they're wrapping up the summer. And now we're looking forward to kicking it with superstars. Now that's CBS Sports Sunday. We'll see you on September 8th.
So I don't know that I'm entirely excited about this entire list of guys, but it is a group of guys that I could see myself moving a lot in the first month of the season. And at quarterback, it's Bryce Young, it's Will Levis. Both have shown some signs this preseason that things could be better. Both got, I think, pretty clearly upgrades in terms of play callers, pretty clearly upgrades in terms of offensive weapons, hopefully a little bit better offensive line play. There should be, and their second-year quarterbacks. Do you have optimism for Levis and Young, for either Levis or Young, or are you just going to poo-poo them both?
No, I actually have some pretty good optimism for Bryce Young, and that's mostly because he was a number 1 overall draft pick. We have seen that he does have the talent. He can run an offense. Like it's not like he was a complete disaster. It was bad. Don't get me wrong. It was a bad rookie year, but it wasn't a complete disaster all the time. And we've seen Dave Canales just make miracles happen with Baker Mayfield, with Geno Smith, guys that we thought were totally done. And so I do have a bit more faith in Bryce Young, and I love that they addressed the interior offensive line, which is where he struggled with pressure up the middle. I love that they added Jonathan Brooks. I know he won't be able to play for the first 4 weeks, but he's a guy that can catch passes and make things happen out of the backfield. And the fact that they know that we need to focus our offense on Deontay Johnson and just get him the ball because he gets open, and that's what Panthers receivers struggled with so much last year. It gives me hope. I'm looking at this offense in the preseason. I'm saying, okay, this is an offense that looks competent. It looks like Dave Canales really does know what he's doing. It's not just a lightning struck twice. Like it's probably going to strike a third time. So I'm in on that. With Will Levis, I think there is some reason for optimism. I think that if you are rostering him, you need to be ready for the ups and the downs. He's going to be that gunslinger. The Titans worry me a little bit. I don't think that they know what their identity is. I don't think they know if they want to be a passing offense, a running offense. It just seems like they said, let's just kind of get everyone around Will Levis and see what happens. And if I'm not mistaken, their new head coach was an offensive coordinator, but not an actual play caller. Is that correct?
I don't believe he called plays for the Bengals.
Yeah. So
yeah, that's a good point.
It's one of those things where I'm just like, okay, like he obviously he understands the game of football really well, and he understands offense really well, and they've put these pieces around him, but there are enough question marks there, whether it's, is DeAndre Hopkins done injury-wise? Can the running backs work together, which I'm sure they can? Is the offensive line really that much improved? Can Will Levis just be a starting quarterback that can make it through 17 games? I don't know. So I have a little bit more optimism with Bryce Young.
I do have Bryce Young 2 spots ahead of Will Levis in my dynasty rankings. I want to ask, we're going to go down some names, and let's say that you have this older quarterback, and maybe you're not quite to the end of the road, but you can see the end of the road coming in a super flex league. Are you willing to trade? You can be yes on Bryce, yes on both, or no on both, I guess. Geno Smith for either one of these quarterbacks.
I would trade Geno for Bryce.
But not for Levis.
Not for Levis.
Aaron Rodgers.
Yes for Bryce, no for Levis.
Baker Mayfield.
I would trade Baker Mayfield for both.
Deshaun Watson.
I would take both of those players. I would trade Deshaun Watson for both of those players.
And Jared Goff.
I want Jared Goff because I think best case scenario, Bryce Young is Jared Goff. And I think that's what we're looking at. So I'd rather have Jared Goff.
So you've got some trade targets. You've got a veteran quarterback. You've got an older super flex team. You want to get younger at quarterback. I could see myself getting really excited about Young or Levis and either one of them jumping into my top 15 in the first month of the season. I could also see me pretty much giving up and punting them in like 8 weeks, because last year, there were so many warning signs last year that if there's not a big leap in the first half of this season, I might be ready to give up. We already talked about Javonte Williams. We don't need to talk about him too much, but Ken Walker, there's a guy who's, like, by all reports, had a fantastic training camp. I went into this offseason with the idea of, I like Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet a lot. They both have round 2 draft capital. It's a completely new coaching staff. I don't know which one they're going to favor. It's pretty clear based on the way that they've spoken. They love Ken Walker as well. This guy might be a top 5 dynasty back like a month into the season. Where are you at with Walker?
Yeah, I love Ken Walker. This is a guy that I've loved since he was coming out of college. So hearing the way that the Seattle Seahawks coaching staff is talking about him, the exact quote I think was, "This guy is special. We need to feed him." Is, you don't normally hear that from a guy that you expect to be in some sort of a committee. And the way they're talking about using him in the passing game more often, I think that too many people look back at the Washington offense that Ryan Grubb had and say, oh, he doesn't pass to running backs. And it's actually, no, what he does is he kind of moves things based on his personnel. You go back to Fresno State, he was passing to running backs a bunch. So there could be actually a big receiving game that we have not seen from Ken Walker that could be utilized here. And I just think with this offense being a little bit more exciting, a little more spread out, we are going to see some easier running lanes for Ken Walker, who he doesn't have to try to be this home run hitter every time. He'll still get his home runs, but he's going to get a lot more triples and doubles on these runs, and not just do 0 or 100 every single time.
Fewer K looking. No more, not as many strikeouts, not as many pop-ups behind home plate that lose 5 yards. Dylan asks if we'll have any more chat questions today. You know what? Looking at the rundown, we're going to have a little bit of time. If you got some chat questions, get them in the chat. We'll ask Alfredo. I've already asked him questions he didn't know was coming. He showed that he can do that. We'll do it again. I will say a couple of wide receivers. I want to see if you agree or disagree with this sentiment. And I think first we should just limit it to Drake London, because I do feel like specifically in redraft, he's basically being drafted as if the breakout is inevitable. Like there's no caution whatsoever. This guy who has basically had 900-yard season is a now top 12 wide receiver in round 2. And no doubt. So does the first month, I think, again, a consensus top 10 wide receiver in Dynasty, does he need to show us like some validation early in the season, or does this assured breakout give him some insulation, like maybe through November?
Oh, I think that if we get to week 5 or 6 and we're not seeing the target volume we want to see, the sky will absolutely fall. Like
Okay.
it will be chaos in dynasty leagues with Drake London, because it's just Drake London, Kyle Pitts. How often can we keep doing the same thing over and over? They are incredibly talented players, and they do have these spurts where they're getting target volume. But if we don't see that this year, where he's a guy that can score touchdowns, run after the catch, and get consistent targets, or be the target leader on his team, yeah, I'm going to be really worried. I mean, he could very easily be looking at 120 targets or more in this offense. We got to see what that's going to mean. You say that we have Drake London, kind of this perceived breakout. I think we're doing the same thing with Garrett Wilson, and we've seen more from Garrett Wilson, but I think the scenarios are just very similar. It's these older quarterbacks coming off of Achilles, and we are drafting them, at least in redraft, at what I believe their ceiling is. We're drafting them kind of at a best case scenario when you've got some guys right underneath them that are, I don't want to say more likely to reach that ceiling, but they've done it before a bunch of times. So yeah, I think the Drake London thing, if by like week 5 or 6, he's not doing what everyone expected, I think everyone is going to be panic selling.
And I think I'm viewed as the anti-Drake London guy because of redraft, but everybody loves an opportunity to talk about their favorite dynasty team. And this is my favorite dynasty team. I have a roster with Mahomes and Breece Hall and Derrick Henry and Garrett Wilson and Drake London.
Okay.
And I kind of have considered selling London before the start of the season.
I mean, it depends. What are you looking at getting in return?
Well, I'm a true contender. I've got Devontae Adams, Devontae Smith, like Zamir White, Javonte Williams, several running backs that I can fill in for that RB2 spot. But I'm just like, I do feel like his value is not tied at all to what he has produced.
He's tied to a mythos that he can be a top 10 wide receiver year in and year out. It's not
right.
It's like what can you get in return for him? Are we talking about 2 firsts? Or like is
it I'm hoping that I could go get a top 20 wide receiver and a first.
Yeah. Like and if we're doing that, I'm not against, like, who's an example of a top 20 player?
Like, could I turn him into George Pickens in a first or Tank Dell in a first?
I would do Tank Dell in a first in a heartbeat.
Yeah, we may test those waters out. Hopefully,
I'm pretty good on the George Pickens in a first as well, too.
So another guy, much lower end, but I think huge first month of the season for him, Jackson Smith-Njigba, because like he was in what is now known as the Roma Dunze spot, where you get drafted by a team that has 2 great vets, and we're not going to hold it against you. Well, we said we weren't going to hold it against him, but I think his value fell like 5 to 10 spots in dynasty wide receiver rankings since he was drafted. And now we're all pretty excited that, Tyler Lockett's going to go away and Grubb's going to make this offense awesome and JSN's going to have a great year. His value could also completely fall apart, or he could be a top 15 wide receiver the first month of the season and jump into the top 12 of dynasty rankings.
Yeah, I had this debate last night with Jeff Bell on their show where I said that I would clearly take JSN over Ladd McConkey, and he was clearly in the other camp. And we just both surprised each other. We were just shocked that someone else could have such a different opinion on this. For me, it's I think like we forget how talented JSN was coming out of college. He outproduced Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson at Ohio State when they were all there at the same time. I don't think that's something we should just brush aside. The problem last year was not that JSN was particularly bad. It's that he wasn't used properly. He was getting, I believe it was a 6.1 average depth of target, which was like 78th amongst 81 qualifying receivers. He was number 1 in designed plays that were going to him, percentage of designed plays. So he was this screen merchant for the Seahawks. And that was never what his role was in Ohio State. He was actually a guy that could attack the middle of the field. He was a guy that could track the ball deep. And now in comes Ryan Grubb, where I think we are going to see a very different version of JSN. And he is a guy that I think that he will move ahead. I don't think Tyler Lockett goes away because we just don't see that all that often. But I think he is the guy that moves ahead and becomes the wide receiver 2 for a much better, a much more improved offense.
So I do have JSN 4 spots ahead of Ladd McConkey, but they are so close in my rankings that I don't know. I could say I strongly prefer either one. I think if you told me that a month from now he is clearly behind McConkey, I would believe you. If you told me that he was not even the same stratosphere, clearly ahead, I would also believe you. We'll see how the next month goes for him. I'm going to skip the last couple of names that I had on the list because we do have a couple of questions and I want to get to those. Dylan, 10-team, Superflex, half PPR. He traded away Josh Jacobs, received Christian Kirk and Jalen Polk. It's a running back heavy contending team that fell short of a title last year. So it's a 2-for-1 deal. He gave up the best player in the deal. Grade the trade, Alfredo.
Sorry, Dylan. I'm going to give this a C. Christian Kirk would have had a lot more value had this been a PPR league, a full PPR over half. Josh Jacobs, especially with the news of Marshawn Lloyd not being healthy, not really being active, Josh Jacobs is moving up my rankings in redraft. So if you're talking about being a contending team, even though you had a lot of running backs, I think I think you could have gotten better for Josh Jacobs. Or
exactly what Matt said in the chat. He should just do your job for you, Alfredo.
And he did it less words. He did it so much more efficiently.
I will say in a full PPR league, that's almost exactly equal value. I always say if you're giving up the better player in the deal, you need to get more than equal value. So I think a C is probably kind. I think hopefully Christian Kirk goes out and has a top 12 wide receiver season and you feel really good about it. Ralph wants to know, what's Javante's trade value in a 1 QB league, and should I wait to trade him during the offseason? I think the answer for me to the first question answers the second question, because I don't think his value in a 1 QB dynasty league at this moment is as high as it should be. I'm higher on him than all of the trade charts that are based on trades that actually happen or consensus opinion. And so I would wait to trade him until during the season, even though I know there's some risk doing that with a running back who's already suffered an ACL injury.
Yeah, I think that's probably what I would be doing too. This isn't a player that we're necessarily, it's not like Drake London where his value is tied to his mythos that he can be really good. We've seen him be a top 5 dynasty running back at one point, and then the floor fell out. And so now we're just kind of sitting here. I don't know that you're going to get what Javonte Williams could truly be worth at this point. I think that if you are not contending and you have Javonte, wait about 3 or 4 weeks. And when Javonte Williams is a top 15 running back in fantasy football, all of a sudden he's going to be a lot more valuable to the manager that wants to trade for him. So Heath, I'm in full agreement with you. If you're a contender, I think just hold on to him. If you're not,
right. He said he had 4 running backs that were better. So my thought would probably be, look at the consensus opinion of those running backs, see which one consensus likes more than you, and go trade that guy. Because I think you're going to be able to start Javonte this year as at least a flex. Dragon Balls has McBride and Pitts trying to move a tight end. He has Justin Herbert at quarterback. Doesn't like that at all. It's a 1 QB league. What do you think about Kyle Pitts for Jordan Love? I'm glad I have you on this show, because there's no chance in the world that I would trade Kyle Pitts for Jordan Love, but you might. What do you think? 1 QB, Pitts for Love.
No, I don't think that you have any reason, even though you have 2 good tight ends, I don't think you have any reason to trade a guy that could be a potential tight end 1 for a quarterback in a single quarterback league. I think those guys are a little bit easier to come across. And it would have to be like someone even better than Jordan Love, honestly, if I'm doing it. I know you and I both love Trey McBride, but I don't think there's a shot where I'm trading Kyle Pitts for a quarterback in a single quarterback league.
Yeah, just looking, because I've got my single QB trade chart here, and it will be updated very shortly, probably early next week. But there's 5 QBs that I would trade Kyle Pitts for in a 1 quarterback league. I'd rather have Patrick Mahomes. I'd rather have Josh Allen. I'd rather have Lamar and Jalen Hurts. And I'd probably rather have Burrow, but it's close. I'm just much lower, it seems, on Jordan Love than the general consensus. Is he a top 12 dynasty quarterback for you? Top 10 dynasty quarterback? Where are you at on him?
I'm looking right now, and I've got him at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've got him at quarterback 10 in Dynasty. And so I've got him just behind Kyler Murray and just ahead of Jaden Daniels. We don't quite know how good Jaden Daniels will be at this level. At least Jordan Love, we've seen a top 5 quarterback season from him, and the team is set up pretty nicely around him, where there seems to be that there's going to be some consistency year after year. There's not a coach in the hot seat. There are plenty of weapons around him. So that does a lot for me in terms of the quarterback position, because I think quarterbacks, even though we all like to play dynasty in a 2 to 3 year window, I think quarterback is one of those positions where we can actually look in a longer window, a 4 to 5 year window, especially with guys that are established. So yeah, I'll keep Jordan Love a bit higher here.
Alfredo, thank you so much for being here today. Remind everybody where they can find your work. Tell them what you've got coming up.
Yes, you can find all my work over at footballguys.com and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@footballguysfantasy. We've got the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. You can find that on Apple or Spotify as well. And we're going to be doing that show 5 times a week, myself and my co-host Dave Kluge. So you can check us out. And then you can always follow me on Twitter at Alfredo A. Brown, where I'm mixing in fantasy football stuff with pop culture stuff and other dumb things that I'm doing on a daily basis.
Thank you, Alfredo. Thank you, Nada. Thank you to everybody who was active in the chat. Great chat today. No, I didn't have to ban anybody. It was fantastic. I appreciate everybody listening on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else that you get podcasts. We will talk to you next Tuesday.